Normally, I only review gaming laptops, but today we're looking at something even smaller. This right here is the ROG Ally X, which is the newest gaming handheld from Asus. And minus a keyboard, it's actually a lot more like a gaming laptop than you might think. So let's take a closer look at it. If you enjoy this video, please subscribe. By name, it's a handheld, but it sure is a big one. If you know how big a Nintendo Switch is, this thing is even larger. And quite a bit thicker too. But that isn't necessarily bad. It feels really comfortable to hold if you have big hands. In smaller hands, it's absolutely huge. Now please replay the last 10 seconds of this video with your eyes closed. But from the outside, the ROG Ally X looks really cool. And it's built really tough as well. It does have a full plastic body, but this is some high quality stuff. It doesn't creak or make any noise if you manhandle it, and with these grippy spots on the bottom, it doesn't slip out of your hands if they get a bit sweaty. For a handheld, it is pretty heavy, but it's actually more manageable than I thought. And while it is a handheld, it packs more specs than some powerful gaming laptops. The Ryzen Z1 Extreme is a custom AMD laptop chip specifically made for handhelds. And with 24 GB of unified RAM, this thing can handle quite a bit. But keep in mind that it is still a handheld, so it will not outperform a fully fledged gaming laptop with a dedicated GPU. But for its size, you'll be pretty surprised by how much this thing can actually handle. And more important, how long it can last on battery during gaming. For such a small device, it has a pretty impressive port selection. It has one USB 3.2 Gen 2 port with DisplayPort out, and also a USB 4.0 port, which means you could connect an external GPU to it to make it even more powerful. And with a micro SD card slot, this thing has more ports than the average MacBook. This is very handy for a quick and easy storage upgrade. It also charges through its USB-C ports with this tiny 65-watt charger that comes with it. But it actually supports up to 100 watts of charging, so other USB-C chargers could fill it up more quickly. Now the Ally X has 4 menu buttons around its screen. The bottom right button just opens Armory Crate, and the bottom left button gives you the quick settings menu, which is very handy for changing settings while you're playing games. The joysticks are quite nice and feel very similar to those on an Xbox One controller or the Nintendo Switch Pro controller. The A, B, X, Y buttons are nice and clicky and don't stick, unlike with some models on the regular ROG Ally. The top trigger buttons are nice and clicky as well. And the bottom ones are analog, which is awesome. There's also these 2 extra programmable buttons on the bottom, but they aren't as nice feeling since they're pretty hard to press down. But this is probably intentional since your fingers naturally rest on them while using it. It's got a 7-inch Full HD IPS display with a 120Hz refresh rate. So this is quite a good screen. I'm really glad that it's a high refresh rate display. This is pretty much essential for any fast-paced games. And 1080p is perfectly fine for such a small screen. It's very sharp and makes using Windows on it a breeze. The IPS display does have some uneven backlight bleeding, but this is only really visible in very dark scenes. Other than that, the colors look amazing, and the display gets really bright at 500 nits. So any game should look great on it, even outdoors. That is, if you clean it enough, because this screen picks up fingerprints very easily. Now for such a small device, it has amazing speakers. They've got plenty of bass and can get pretty loud. Just like with their gaming laptops, Asus is really good at tuning these speakers. And under high-speed fan noise, you can still hear them quite well. Now, it doesn't have a webcam since, it's a gaming handheld, but it does have a microphone, and this is what it sounds like. Sometimes I have issues where the sound cuts out, but I guess we'll see if that happens right now. Now let's find out how powerful this thing really is by running some benchmarks. In Cinebench R23, we can see that the CPU really is just a moderately fast laptop chip. The single core score is okay, but its multi-core score is on par with modern gaming laptops. In 3D Mark TimeSpy, the score is quite a bit lower than other gaming laptops though, but that's to be expected. But screw all those numbers. How does it perform in some actual games?
No!
Now, while I did have to turn down the settings on most games, it ran at playable frame rates in pretty much everything. Now, the iGPU in here won't rival any real gaming laptops. I mean, you shouldn't expect this thing to outperform this. But for how incredibly small this thing is, it's really impressive that it just runs everything. And because the screen is so small compared to a laptop, you don't even notice the graphical downgrade. I mean, can you tell the difference between low and ultra graphics here? I mean, I know I can't, but I do notice the big difference in frame rate between them. So you can easily run most games on low to medium settings on this thing with no problems. Now, here's a big point for a portable: battery life. Now, it's pretty hard to create a general battery test because everybody uses their devices differently, so I created two scenarios. In the first scenario, I tested it in silent mode, which limits the chip to 18 watts of power, and just used it regularly. So think some light web browsing, just moving files around, and browsing the Steam web store. In this normal light use case, it lasted 5 to 6.5 hours, which is pretty good. In the second scenario, I played Battlefield 1 with the chip on turbo mode, which means full performance and the most power usage. And it lasted around 2 to 2.5 hours. Now, I know that might seem low, but it's a lot more than the average gaming laptop. Now, if you game at silent instead of the turbo performance profile, you will get like a half an hour more battery life, but the game also runs a lot worse in that mode, so I wouldn't really recommend it. But battery life really depends on the type of game. So lighter games, for example indie titles, will last a lot longer on the Ally than graphically intensive games. But since it's so portable and the charger is so light, you can charge it a lot easier than a gaming laptop, since you don't have to carry around a big power brick. So it absolutely is more versatile. And what's great is, it doesn't make much noise at all. During normal use, it's basically silent. And while it does ramp up the fan speed during heavy games, it really is not that loud at all. And you can easily hear the speakers over the fan noise. And if you do want it to run quieter, you can also just set it to the silent or performance profile. Now, since this thing is so small, it obviously doesn't have very much upgradeability. But you can upgrade its internal M.2 SSD. It's just a regular 2280 size, which is very easy to find. On top of that, you could of course just add extra storage through a micro SD card, but that would be slower than the SSD storage. Now, as for the pricing, this is a more expensive gaming handheld. The ROG Ally X starts at $899, which is quite a bit more than the competition. The Steam Deck is less than half the price, and the regular ROG Ally is a bit cheaper. Now, I am expecting this model to go on sale soon, but it's still pretty expensive. Unless you compare it to a gaming laptop. In that case, it's actually very cheap. So now for the big question. Should you buy the ROG Ally X? Well, it definitely gets a recommendation for me. I did not expect to like this thing in the beginning, but the moment I picked it up, I was pretty impressed. The fact that you can just play every PC game in the palm of your hand is basically magic to me. And it's also just pretty cool to have a tiny Windows 11 machine in your hand like this. And while it is absolutely worth it, there are options out there that are a lot cheaper. I mean, the Steam Deck is the obvious competition here. It's half the price and really is not that much slower than the Ally X. But the Steam Deck runs SteamOS, which does not support some games with external launchers or anti-cheat like Apex Legends, some Battlefield games, and a bunch of other games. Meanwhile, the Ally X just runs Windows natively. Yes, you can install Windows on a Steam Deck, but it's a bit of a hassle. And the regular ROG Ally is also just a lot cheaper, but it has a lot worse battery life. So if you can spare the money for this thing, I really think it is worth it. But how would it stack up to a real full-sized gaming laptop? Well, let's compare it to its uncle, the Zephyrus G14, in the next video. I will see you all then. Bye bye.